Good morning, everyone. I am Colleen Banzan together with my group mates. So, our group is called Igi Iwe. So, Igi Iwe is a Yoruba language which means tree of books. So, we really tried our best to connect our group name into the literature, which is our subject, and also with the Afro-Asian literature. So, of course, most of our topics would be about African literature. So, we decided to use a language that Africans used to name our group. So, again, Igi Iwe is a Yoruba language, and it is commonly used in countries like Nigeria and other parts of South Africa. So our motto is trees of books, fruits are knowledge. So we tried to connect the word tree to books. I mean the word tree to fruits. So of course, when you have a tree, you would have a fruit. And if you would use that tree, which is the book, you would gain knowledge, which is the fruit. So yes, let's move on to our first topic. So our first topic is a little bit of an overview about the history of African literature. So it is said that African literature have both the oral and written literature. So mostly in written literature, Africans use, of course, African language, but there are also some types of books or literary works that is written in African European language. And also it is said that African literature almost comes with European history of literature almost at the same time. So they have both the equal amount of ancientry. So they are both ancient. So it is said that Africa goes with ancient Egypt almost at the same time. They are established almost at the same time. That is why both of their literary works or their literature history have come a long way. So just like one of the example which is posted on the slide, just like the ancient Egyptians, Africans also used hieroglyphs to convey messages. So hieroglyphs is a writing system which uses pictures or symbols to represent words to convey their messages. So that is one of the proof that Africa and Egypt almost come at the same time.
Hi, my name is Princess Kismundo, and I'm going to discuss the characteristic of African literature. Africa's history with colonialization, paired with its own unique values and methods of storytelling, that created a unique genre of literature with very particular characteristics. Most of literary pieces of African literature shed light on two controversial issues such as racial discrimination, political conflicts, civil war, gender sensitivity, and lastly is the human rights issues. So now we have here the characteristic of African literature. We have slave narratives, protests against colonializations, calls for independence, African pride, hope for the future, and lastly is the descent. Yeah. Number one is slave narrative. Slave narrative is written by fugitive slaves and it's about their lives in the South and how they live as slaves and often after escaping from slavery. Colonializations led by slavery. Millions of African people who were enslaved and brought to Western countries around the world from the 16th to 19th century, and it's called African diaspora. Okay, number two, we have the protest against colonialization. Um, Writers or African writers aims to reveal the social evil of colonial rule and to encourage the sense of African. Here, writers speak out about the social evil of colonial rule and fight for independence and address and express their objections through writing. Okay, third one is calls for independence. Independence campaigns led by nationalist leader with charismatic personality and a great intellectual ability with a touch of international pan-Africanist. They were able to frame ideas of equality, nationalism, and pan-Africanism in a way that both reached the masses and resonated at home and abroad. Number four is African pride. African creating identities that promotes the idea of cultural movements of African literary renaissance. Number five is the hope for the future. Hope for the future focuses on the literatures of hope and despairs over the betrayal of the goals of the liberation struggles in Africa.
Oral literature or orature is often sung or recited by bards or griots and can take the forms of songs, with tongue twister, recitation, poetry, proverbs, and riddles. Manners, custom, superstition, ballads, proverbs, etc. are rarely the constituent of oral literature. The oral arts of Africa are rich and varied, developing with the beginnings of African culture, and they remain living tradition that continue to unfold and flourish today. Forms of oral literature. The first one is myths. Myths is about a story and fundamental structural device used by storytellers. As a story, it reveals change at the beginning of time with gods as the central characters. As a storytelling tools, the creation of metaphor, it is about material and method. Yoruba mythology are the God's characters example. It involves the presence of supreme being and the other more minor gods or spirits known as orishas. Orishas which are both male and female. The exact number of orishas is not known, but is said to about 400, or some sources claim that there are 700 or 1,440 or even more uncountable. Either way, the Orisha are spirits sent out by the Supreme God to help the humanity succeed on earth and teach them all they know to know spirituality.
So next, what is epic? Epic is a long narrative poem in elevated style recounting the deeds of a legendary or historical hero. And it's also a work of art such as the novel or drama that resembles or suggests an epic. And also it is a series or events of or body of legend or traditional to form the proper subject of an epic. So, next slide please. Miwinda. What is Miwinda? In this chapter, it deals with the story of the hero Miwinda from the Democratic Republic of Congo in Africa. In the course of epic, Miwinda develops from a powerful but boastful young man to a moderate and responsible leader who has become an acceptable to the Nyanga people. Nyanga people is the people who live in Congo. So, next slide please. Digers. Digers is a creative writing that refers to a mournful song or a piece of music. It is often used to create a sorrow or melancholic tone in literature, serving as a reflection of loss, grief, or death. And others can also refer to a poem, which is typically written in elegiac stanzas and expressed in a somber funeral style. Next slide, please. The Dirge of the Warrior's Widow. So, who is Shaka? Shaka was a Zulu sheep in 1916 to 1828, and the founder of the Zulu Empire in southern Africa. He is created with creating a fighting force that devastated in the entire region. So, next slide please. This example is a poem by Daniel P. Konene from Heroic Poetry of the Basotho in 1971. It is an element by Sotho woman said to date from the time of Shaka Zulu's wars. There are different versions of this song in several Southern Africa languages, presenting Shaka's achievements from the perspective of those who suffered from them. So next, praise poems. Praise poems can also refer to any poem that has a tone of gratefulness and humility, and it potentially be about broader subjects such as praising a nation or a city. And it refers to a genre of poetry in which a person or a god is praised by the poet, usually featuring the use of hyperbole. So next, what is a proverb? Proverb is a short saying of piece of folk wisdom that emerges from the general culture rather than being written by a single individual author. And it uses metaphors or creative imaginary to express a broader truth. And it is also the part of every spoken language and are related to such other forms of folk literature as riddles and fables that has originated in oral tradition.
Good day everyone. I know some of us knows that African literature can be divided into three basic categories, which is pre-colonial, colonial, and the last one is the post-colonial. But today, we will be going to tackle about the pre-colonial literature in Africa. But first, what is African literature? So, according to my research, African literature is basically came from Africa. It's either oral, or they can call it orature, and it can be written in African and Afro-Asiatic language, and it includes all literature produced before Spanish colonization, like chants, proverbs, songs, and also the folk narrative. And all of these are passed from generation to generation by the word of mouth. Some examples of it can be traced back at least the 4th century AD, and one of the best known is the Kebra Nagas, or they called it the Glory of the King, or the Book of the King. And the other examples are the Epic of Sundiata, basically composed in medieval Mali. And the older one is the Epic of Tinga, which came from the old Ghana Empire. And one of the most popular African folktale is the Trickster, and many more. Many historians say that there are about 3,000
300,000 manuscript in many libraries and private collections. Most of them is written in Arabic, and some of them basically written in native language. So we will be going to tackle about the Kebra Nagas, which means in Ethiopic, the glory of kings. The Kebra Nagas has fascinated scholars since the modern era. It is a Judeo-Christian based text that traces the origin of the Solomonic dynasty of Ethiopia to the Queen of Sheba, also known as Makeda in Ethiopia, and King Solomon of Jerusalem. In early 14th century, in the Kebra Nagas, or Glory of Kings, a collection of legends that related the birth of Menelik, associated Ethiopia with the Judeo-Christian traditions, and provided a basic for Ethiopian national unity through the Solomonic dynasty, Semitic culture, and the Amharic language. In this sacred tales tells that the story of the relationship between the biblical King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba, as well as their son Menelik. Menelik, who famously brought the Ark of the Covenant to Ethiopia.
Traditional tales. The first tale is a Tricker's Tales, a story featuring a protagonist who has magical power and who is characterized as a comedian of opposites. This archetype is a character who represents disruption, mischiefs, and humor. Other name of trickster is a con artist, charlatan, cheats, deceiver, and impostor. Commonly cast in negative lights. However, this is wrong since he knows whether it's good or evil. Yet he is responsible for both. He has both light side and a dark side. Though his playfulness, that is what defines trickster. The value of trickster tales is what people appreciate, what they laugh at, and what they fear or desire, and how they see themselves. The second traditional tale is the Anansi the Spider Tales. Anansi was a very smart but mischievous god who was changed into a spider by his father Nyame for not giving up on his mischievous ways. Anansi the Spider is an African folktale character who associated with skills and wisdom. In this story, Anansi goes on a journey only to find himself in a great danger. After that, Anansi's 6 sons work together to save him from great danger. Anansi the Spider is one of the most popular animal trickster from West African mythology. Anansi's stories are often funny and teach us lessons about the consequences of making bad choices. And that is much better to be smart than to be strong.
So basically, our report is all about African oral and pre-colonial literature. And if you don't have any question or clarification about the topic, we hope that you listen and learn a lot from us. And before this meet end, we prepared some activity that posted in the slide, and we would like to thank you for listening.